Okay, everybody, welcome back. This time I am here with two people that we connected through social media and through other colleagues that we know. And we were talking beforehand. I'm both very, very excited for this. Um, Also a little tentative because this is an area that maybe I don't know as much as I would like to. So I'm looking forward to our conversation to learn more about this. Today, we're talking about Taylor Swift and Taylor Swift's connections to Disney and also just the Taylor Swift phenomenon. So I'm joined today by Jennessa Hester. She's a doctoral student or doctoral candidate, sorry, at Texas Tech University. She's doing her dissertation on Disney songs, but she also researches a lot about Taylor Swift. Um, and then also, I'm joined by Candace Saunders-Grewe, a doctoral student at Regents University, who her dissertation, she wants her dissertation and her work to be on what is the Taylor Swift celebrity focus. So those things that kind of build up to how we hold people to celebrity status and how that relates directly to Taylor Swift. So welcome both of you to the show in class, and thank you very, very much for being here. We'll start with that. Um, and then if we could, and I'll just go because I'm looking at my screen left to right. Um, I'll ask the questions and then Jennessa, if you want to go ahead and start, sorry, we can go that way. So the first question is talk about your Disney fandoms and your Taylor Swift fandom. So from when your Disney fandom started to now, when your Taylor Swift fandom started to now.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me here. I'm uh, happy to be having this conversation with you all because there are a few things I love more than Disney and Taylor. So them together is just a perfect tour de force. Um, my Disney fandom started very, very quickly after I was born, if we're being honest, as is true for many children from the 90s on. Disney's just an ever-present feature of your life. The first movies I saw were Disney. The first shows I watched were Disney. I have been told stories about how I would run through VHSs of Disney films. The one in particular for me was the Aristocats, apparently. Uh, so I've been a Disney fan basically as long as I've had cognizance and the ability to perceive things for more than 5 seconds at a time. In terms of Taylor, she was not around quite that long ago, but I came to her with her second album, Fearless, back when I
Okay.
was in early high school. And I developed a deep affinity for that album, her debut, Speak Now, which came out right after I became a fan. And uh, her and Disney both led me through some extremely dark times. I'm transgender, so they both provided escapes of gender dysphoria and things of that nature. And when I was in the lowest moments of my life, they were the two fandoms and entertainment media products in a way that were always there and that I would continually go back to try and find
Mhm.
comfort. So, um, and that fandom has never for either of them waned. It's only gotten
Mhm.
more intense as I've gone into academia and as I found out, wait, you can study Disney, you can study Taylor. I am going to do that.
Mhm.
So
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, Candace, go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you for having me as well. I've also been a Disney fan for most of my life. I'm not sure I can remember not being a fan of Disney. I grew up in Southern California, so Disneyland is right here. So I pretty much visited Disneyland when I was, as soon as I could, basically. And I'm a huge fan of Disney's live action films like Pirates of the Caribbean. I loved the ride first, and then I loved the movies. And so, of course, I loved those films, and I really love Star Wars. And of course, they've been expanding that a lot. So those films have kind of been following me for at least the last 20 years or so. And of course, who doesn't love all the classic films with the Disney princesses? I loved Mulan growing up and Pocahontas. So Disney has just kind of always been present in my life. I know my parents also grew up in Southern California, so Disneyland's right here. They grew up with it as well. So I think they kind of brought me into it, if you will. Taylor Swift was a little bit different for me. Growing up in Southern California, I grew up in a more rural area. And so I grew up on country music, and I have always been an aspiring, or at least when I was growing up, an aspiring singer-songwriter. And so when Taylor Swift kind of came onto the scene, that was a big deal because she was a little bit older than me. And she was basically a role model for me to become a musician too. And I played piano, but she was the one who kind of inspired me to play guitar. I remember hearing teardrops on my guitar, and of course being like, well, I want to play guitar so I can cry over boys on my guitar too. And so, of course, I learned all the Taylor Swift early songs like Our Song, and the album Fearless also had a really big impact on me. And that was kind of the one where I really got into Taylor Swift. Of course, but I've been listening to her for now since I think 2006 and continue to follow her music. So yeah, I've loved both for a really long time, and always happy to meet other Disney fans and Taylor Swift fans.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you both. One a question um, about the her connection to Taylor Swift's connection to her fans. Um, Taylor Swift's fans call themselves Swifties, right? Is there is it just a play on her name, her last name, or is there something else behind that nickname? And do you know kind of the origin of that? Was that something she kind of created, or was it fan created? Yeah, either can answer. Well,
I'm actually not sure on that one. I've been a Taylor Swift fan for a really long time, but I don't remember the Swifties name popping up until maybe in the last like 10 years or so.
okay.
So I mean, I've been a fan of Taylor Swift so long that that word didn't even exist. So I don't know if Jennessa, you have thoughts on that one.
That tracks with my experience. I don't know if there were quote unquote Swifties as
Mhm,
a differentiation from Taylor Swift fans early on. Uh, Early on, she was very not a big enough artist, maybe, to have that scope and size of fandom to warrant a name. And of course, through much of her early career, Taylor Swift was not very well liked by general media outlets. There was
mhm,
one bump in sheer positivity due to the Kanye West incident at the
mhm,
VMAs, but we get to the album Reputation through the fact that she has so much hate flung her way. So it tracks with my experience that Swiftie wasn't a term that really came up for me until she was nearing the end of her time with Big Machine Records and going solo and things like that. Um, what's also worth considering here is that stan culture has become more and more present over the past decade and a half. So Lady Gaga's Little Monsters,
mhm,
the Bayhive, these uh, these groups following one specific star or one specific act. That is in the amount that we have it now, somewhat of a new phenomenon.
okay, okay. So before we get into anything else, um, tell us your backgrounds really quick, your training, your educational journey, as you both alluded to it in your introductions, but um, Jennessa, go ahead and start.
Yeah, my educational journeys, I was born and raised in Oklahoma. So I started education there. My original thought was that I was going to be a filmmaker. So I went to a film production program, got a BFA in that, and during that process realized I don't like being on set. It's very
Hmm.
stressful. Lots of people just stressing each other out. So
Okay.
I decided to take a year, figure out what parts of that experience I liked, what parts I didn't. And in that time, I realized, oh, it's so much of the academia stuff that I truly enjoyed. So I went into an English program in New Orleans, a very traditional English program, got my MA there, and then I wanted to combine sort of the worlds of media and English together. And that's how I ended up here at Texas Tech,
Okay.
since their film and media studies program is within the School of English. And during that time, particularly the transition from the MA to the PhD, that's when I realized, oh, Disney, oh, Taylor Swift, these are things that I can make the center of my work.
Hmm.
And slowly but surely that has uh, grown into more and more of my scholarly identity.
Yeah, very, very cool. They people study what they enjoy, and many times to understand more about ourselves. So that definitely tracks with that. Candace, tell us about your background.
Yeah, so like Jennessa, I also started as an English major. Actually, my bachelor's is in English. I earned that at Radford University. So I mentioned I grew up wanting to write songs, music. I like writing creatively as well. So that's where that kind of interest came in. But then for my master's, I decided to kind of switch more to something applied. I kind of had a growing interest in media. So I switched to communications when I pursued my master's at Johns Hopkins University. Took a break for a while, got into marketing, did that jam for a little bit. And then with my PhD, I've switched back to focusing on media. And one of my professors, Dr. Brown, he focuses a lot on studying celebrities and their influence. So, like celebrities like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Elvis Presley, who've had similar followings like Taylor Swift. And that's kind of where my interest has kind of shifted a little bit more towards studying the celebrity and how they have such a strong social influence and how we can kind of see that cult following that's been created around them. So that's kind of what has led me to this topic for my dissertation that I'd be interested in pursuing. But as a side note, not related to my educational journey quite, but kind of my career, like Jennessa, I also was interested in film. I did grow up pursuing acting as a child, and I did actually do background on Disney shows as a teen. So there was that element. I had been on set growing up. I did some of that stuff. It didn't end up taking off. I ended up pursuing education, but that's kind of where I guess my personal connection to Disney, at least Disney stars or Disney film, I guess would be. So I do have that kind of interest, but then I just
Hmm.
kind of stopped after I switched gears to
Okay.
education.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you both. The so kind of the first specific question for Taylor, or Taylor Swift specific question, is she started out as a smaller artist. And Jennessa, you mentioned the VMA awards when she was interrupted um accepting her award. And I think of her as just a brand, going from that to where she was, like it was seen as, which you can never talk about what a person is thinking, and but somebody had the audacity to think they would walk up on stage and interrupt her talking, accepting an award. You go from that to what she did at the Grammys this year, where she gets up and she announces a new album on the Grammy stage. And that, I remember or and from what I read, from what I heard, uh, it was kind of a mixed bag of reviews. Some people really, really liked it. Um, I can't remember the figures. I looked them up at one time. I can't remember the figures of how many people had like watched that specific clip or like liked her tweet or Instagram message after that. Um, she's going to sell a lot of records based on the fact that she's Taylor Swift, but the fact that she did that at the Oscars, um, a lot of people got more attention because of that. There was also another camp that was kind of like, should she have done that at the Oscars? Um, did either of you, what are your thoughts on that? And have you talked to anybody or studied anything kind of about the way that she uses her platform to promote upcoming albums, upcoming projects? What are your thoughts on that?
So I have quite a few thoughts. Um, I think you mentioned Oscars as opposed to Grammys a couple times there, which I think is
Yeah,
another
Grant,
extremely
yeah.
useful conversation given how hard Taylor has attempted to get nominations for the Academy Awards, and the fact that she has inked her first her debut feature
Hmm.
film with Searchlight Pictures, owned by Disney.
Hmm.
So I think there's a whole conversation to be had there about the Oscars. But in terms of the Grammys, we see a shift in Taylor's distribution strategies, not immediately when she leaves Big Machine Records, because Lover is a fairly traditional release, just under new management, as it were. However, COVID hits, and then she has these two albums, Folklore and Evermore, that are released very suddenly. Folklore in particular, no one knew it was coming. It was close to your Beyonce styled blind drop. Not quite that, but close. So those albums become successes, especially Folklore, which wins the Grammy for Album of the Year, her
Hmm.
third album to do so. And that's where we see a switch in how Swift and her team handle distribution of albums and releases of albums. So once it's time for Midnights to come out, and once it's time to start getting these album re-recordings out, the Taylor's versions, they start off somewhat mild. Her first album re-release doesn't do gangbusters. However, it's very quick that she starts accompanying these releases with new music videos. She starts accompanying them with big notable announcements on various major platform stages, often at award shows. For Midnights, I believe it was also the VMAs. I could be
Okay.
incorrect about that, but she announced it there with notes about stay tuned for Midnight. And of course, given the album name, that became a running theme. So I think she's and her team have realized that she is a big enough star and she has a big enough platform that she can make these large statements at big events, and it's only going to boost her. There may be some criticisms, but one, the criticisms aren't coming from Swifties. So Swifties, by and large, adore every time she does this. And it's not something that, at least thus far, has hurt her career in any notable way. And it's also become a bit expected. There were a lot of people uh, on the road to the Super Bowl this past year who thought that there was going to be a proposal
Yeah.
at the Super
Yeah.
Bowl between Taylor and Travis. And that stems from her growing use of live events to announce major things. And she's also done this at her own concerts too. So she's taking time out of her own events to do it as well.
Okay. Candace, do you have thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts. I'm not even sure where to
Okay.
start. I guess from one point of view, I mainly focused on studying PR for my master's. So kind of seeing her make those announcements at different live events was interesting. And I also teach public speaking. So you think about, what is the context? Where am I giving this speech? When am I making this announcement? There's a time and place. And I know a lot of criticism around her announcing her latest album had to do with, is the Grammys the time and place to announce a new album? And a lot of people criticized it for not being professional and it just not being the time and place, because people just don't really do that. But then on the other hand, Taylor Swift does a lot of things that haven't really been done before. So I think that she's known for a lack of a better term and not a pun, but here it is, shaking things up. So, it doesn't hurt her because that's kind of what she does. And that's how she kind of thrives. And kind of like Jennessa was pointing out with even releasing folklore during the pandemic, that's something a lot of artists weren't doing. I think one of the only artists that also kind of popped up during that time that took advantage of it was Olivia Rodrigo. So kind of filling the space and releasing music when you couldn't follow the traditional model of releasing albums and then touring was unique. And she took advantage of the space that she had. So, I mean, on one hand, like from a traditional PR standpoint, I would probably advise an artist not to do that, but then that's kind of that's her game. That's what she does. And it looks like Jennessa has something she wants to add.
I just have two small things to add. One, in terms of the appropriateness, the Grammys don't hold the same level of prestige that they used to within popular consciousness. The Oscars have far more of an air of prestige about them. So I would be curious if she made an announcement during an Oscar speech, if it would go over more negatively overall, just because that is still seen to some degree as an institution of serious quality, whereas the Grammys, again, after so many losses for people like Kendrick Lamar and Beyonce and so many other Black artists, I think it's just diminished in terms of actually representing the music industry as a whole. And that's I believe a fairly broad sweeping opinion. The other thing I want to notice that you brought up Olivia Rodrigo, who is also notable because she's got her start with Disney. So it's the same Disney Channel pipeline in many ways that we've had, where just as Miley, just as Hillary have gone through these waves to get to the top, so has Olivia. And I think Taylor Swift is halfway the outlier in that, but is also intimately connected to Disney throughout her journey.
Well, and so thank you for saying that. And that kind of transitions us into getting into the highlights of her career, the impact on society. But one thing that I have noticed, and as I said before we started recording, I'll send you to the other podcast that I listen to about Taylor Swift's connections to Disney. She has never been a Disney employee or cat, so to speak. She has made appearances. She has. You mentioned it, Jennessa. She's kind of that, like, she's not in the group, but she's right next to it. I can only imagine that is a very conscious decision on both parties, because one, Disney knows right now there is no brand greater than the Taylor Swift brand. Whatever she has done, I can't think of a time where the criticism outweighs the people bragging on it and people liking what she has done. Um, even the things that, I mean, she's in a whole other stratosphere as far as kind of comparable success. You know, she has to be successful compared to herself, not really compared to other people, because it's not it's not a fair comparison in most instances. So I think that's a very conscious effort on Disney's part. I think it's also conscious effort on her part. You mentioned, and thank you for letting me know I said the Oscars. I didn't even realize that. Um, that you know she is, because I wanted to mention the new movie that she is signed on to direct, and it is associated with Disney. And over the last couple years, it has been like this year. It was kind of the shining light for Disney at the Oscars, because of Poor Things and Searchlight. Um, that I think it's a conscious effort on her part as well, which leads to what we'll talk about in a bit with, you know, the Taylor Swift Eras Tour being on Disney Plus now. I kind of have a theory about that I want to run past the both of you, but um, let's quickly go through your 30-second explanation of what you think Taylor Swift's impact on society is, and then we'll kind of get into more of that. And Candace, let's go ahead and start with you to change things up.
Okay, 30 seconds. I don't know if I can do it. But I think one of the first things that she's done to create a really big impact is she's set a new standard for what women can achieve. We've never really had somebody this big in general, but just as a woman achieving that much, making that much money, that's huge in and of itself. I know we have Rihanna kind of along similar lines being worth an estimated $1 billion, but a new status for women, new direction that way. She's also completely changed the music industry. And people have talked about how it's the Taylor Swift genre. Like, she's created her own genre. She can defy genres. It doesn't really matter what she releases. It's huge. And she's also helped to defend her fellow artists. So she's not just out for herself. She cares about the other artists around her. So she's completely turned that upside down, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. And I think the other big, if I had to say three things, I'm trying to keep it short, she's made a huge economic impact. I mean, she's made money herself, but every city that she touches, every person she interacts with, like even Travis Kelce, it turns to gold, basically. She creates money wherever Eras Tour lands. The people that she's with, she increases their following just because they know her. So she's a big money machine, for lack of a better term.
I'm glad you said that, because before we started recording, I mentioned and we'll talk about Taylor Swift and the NFL more in just a little bit, but I love all of the kind of videos and memes about, like, she put Travis Kelce on the map, you know, and I remember when she went to the first game or two of the Chiefs, it was, you know, like people playing tricks on their fathers and husbands or brothers and everything, like talking about how she put Travis Kelce on the map, and so they could see the men get upset that, like, Travis Kelce being kind of the figure that he is. However, I mean, I remember when all of this first started happening with Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, I was on a family text message thread with my brother-in-law, and my nieces and nephews, and then myself and my wife. And one of my oldest niece said, you know, it's usually the when someone starts dating, it's usually the focus is on the man, and how the woman, the narrative is sort of how the woman can use this to increase her popularity. But she's like, you know, it's completely flipped in this instance, don't you think? And my response was, I really don't know anyone who could who Taylor Swift could ever be dating or associated with that would increase her popularity. Um, I don't know if that person exists. right now. So that's something to think on, because that's kind of the next question I'm going to ask. But Jennessa, go ahead with your statement on her impact on society.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with changes to the music industry and changes to economics in major ways. I also think that applies not just to the structural things, such as her fight against Spotify and her fight against her former label and to have possession over her masters, but also the fact that the terminology that we use to discuss the industry now has shifted as a result of Taylor. I remember I'm a massive fan of Ali and AJ, the Disney Channel artists, now independent, or temporarily 78 Violet, but I don't think anyone talks about that phase anymore. But they started re-releasing and re-recording their songs, the big songs they did with with Disney, and they call them A&A's versions, just as Taylor calls her new albums Taylor's versions. So
Okay.
I think linguistically and rhetorically, so much of modern speech, especially within music, within poetry, is influenced by Taylor's success. The other thing that I will bring up here, and this is more of a broader ideological thing, is similar to how she's shown what women can achieve and what women can do. I think she's shifted a lot of conversations and perceptions about girlhood, what girlhood can be and what girlhood can do. I saw a quote recently. I don't know where I saved it. It was Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be, of someone stating Taylor Swift has allowed women to go and reclaim their girlhood because she is unashamedly going back to her old work, work she did when she was 15 and extremely young, that many women would be embarrassed of reflecting on and certainly publicizing, but that she's changed the nature of how we conceive of those periods in our lives as they're periods of growth, but also periods of identity that we don't have to leave behind as just a phase. Instead, we can call it an era of our life and go back and forth between them as we want or need to.
Okay. Yeah, that's really well said. I like that. You so both of you kind of touched on, um, and Jennessa, when you mentioned going back to earlier albums, and possibly other artists, female artists being kind of afraid to do that. She's not afraid to do that. She's unabashedly doing that. Are you referring to her Taylor's versions where she re-recorded everything? Okay. My next question is about that. When did she leave her old label? And how many has she re-recorded every album that she made with that label now?
So she left her initial label, Big Machine Records, after 6 records. So Reputation
Okay.
was her last album with them. She had one of her more traditional albums released, Lover, which was with Republic, I believe. Um, and at that point, she was going to go on a Lover tour. She was going to do the normal thing you do with an album release. And then COVID hits. And that's when the strange album releases happen for the new ones, Folklore, Evermore, Midnights, which leads to this Eras tour of how do we tour 4 albums at once? Let's
Mm-hmm.
make it every album I've ever done and call it the Eras tour. Um, it's during this time and the split from Big Machine Records over to Republic, that Scooter Braun and folks at Big Machine Records are not being especially forthcoming with Taylor in terms of how they are handling her master recordings. She wants to own them if at all possible, but instead, Big Machine Records sells them off.
Mhm.
And as I understand it, and Candace, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, sold them off without her permission, without her ability to put forward a counter offer. And in doing so, Taylor dragged Scooter through the mud, which just about every Swiftie will say was the correct move on her part. And because she would not be able to own her master recordings, she found sort of contractual loopholes by which she was able to re-record them.
Okay.
Just as she was still able to perform them live at concerts, because what they owned were the specific recordings that she did for them.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, absolutely. And then once that situation happened, she began to re-record all her albums. As far as we are aware, she has re-recorded all of them and released 4 of them so far.
Okay.
Fearless, Speak Now, Red, and 1989. The 2 that we do not have re-releases for yet in terms of actually being released are Reputation and her debut album.
Okay. And just quickly, Candace, can you explain what master recordings are, just for people that are listening?
Yeah, so I mean, master recordings are the original like recording of the song or album. So of course, like W, that is going to be owned by the record company or whoever purchased the rights to that. So you don't have the actual rights to the song itself. So I know Jennessa mentioned that Ali and AJ were releasing some of their songs, re-recording them. Paramore is now going to be doing the same thing and following in Taylor Swift's footsteps. But basically, they might belong to the record company, but you have the right to the song that you wrote. So you can re-record the song in the same exact style. But it's the original recording itself that the artist does not make any money from or no longer has the right to. So it's kind of odd because you would think, can I really emulate that same song the same exact way? But it's a very small delineation. It's just the original recording, and they can do whatever they want with the actual content and basically redo it and create their own version of it.
And I mean, she's the first person to do this, correct? Or is she not the first person to re-record albums so that she owns her masters?
I don't think anyone's ever done it to this level. I
Okay.
think there are a lot of artists who have revisited songs over the years. It's, you know, in the past, artists, if they wanted to make some more money, maybe their career is a little sleepy, they would release those greatest hits CDs or vinyls back in the day. But this is the first artist, I'm pretty sure, to do this at this level. And of course, you know, now she's also created a whole movement out of it, like creating that Eras tour. You see other artists kind of going, oh wait, this is an opportunity to kind of not only re-release and maybe gain the rights to what we had, but also to kind of revive our careers and to do something more with it. Like we see the Jonas Brothers kind of doing a similar thing where they're not re-recording their music, but they're also kind of doing the album tour where they're kind of revisiting their old songs. So it's kind of an opportunity to kind of like what Jennessa touched on already, you know, own your past and not, you know, just abandon it. Whereas in past artists, we had like Madonna, who would just constantly reinvent herself and then throw away the version of her that she was before, and we move on. But Taylor is, you know, bringing back what she had done previously, gaining her rights to what she had, and then also finding a way to kind of monetize it and, you know, make it part of who she is today.
Go ahead,
And
Jennessa.
I think you mentioned a few really wonderful things there that I just want to elaborate on further. In the past, this was usually for greatest hits albums or for fun new remixes to gain additional money and publicity. Taylor, as far as I'm aware, is the first person, certainly on this scale, as you mentioned, to do this for the purpose of ownership, and is
Okay.
also, to my knowledge, the first person who's doing this for her deep cuts. Because usually, like with Madonna, the example you gave, she constantly reinvents herself, except for the big hits. So, like a Prayer, Vogue, things like that will stay with her in her act until she stops performing. But the singles that have fallen away and the album tracks, those are, for most bands and artists, just gone. They're not part of the picture. That's something Taylor has changed in a big way through the full album re-recordings and through in the Eras tour, the secret songs,
Okay.
the ability to take these tracks that otherwise are rarely, if ever, performed and give them the spotlight.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but doing something like this is so important now because one reason it's so important is the way that artists make money now with, you know, with the introduction of like Apple Music, Spotify, with the different playlists. I mean, artists are not making like they're making very, very little every time somebody streams one of their songs. Um, so the way it's been explained to me is for an artist to really make a good amount of money, they go on tour. Um, However, if you own your masters, then at least that little bit that you're getting from when somebody streams something or when somebody purchases something online, you now are keeping, you know, the lion's share of that. Whereas in the past, you would have to be splitting that up. Is so a question: the early albums, a person can still buy those early albums, um, rather regardless if they're the Taylor's versions or not, right? Um,
Yes.
how do if I could get both of you to venture to say new purchases of percentage wise, what do you of the four albums that have been released as Taylor versions, um, what percentage do you think people are buying the Taylor's version versus the original version?
Boy, that would be really tough to say, but I would say probably most people who actually watch Taylor Swift or like if they're a fan of Taylor Swift, I don't think anyone's going to be buying any of the original like or master recordings, if you will. Of course, like I've seen younger people buying some of those older albums like at thrift shops, like if they find the debut
Hmm.
album, and that's kind of one way to get around it. So you're not giving the, you know, Scooter Braun and Big Machine Records any money. So I think most people stream the new Taylor versions because they don't want to support it. And I think that's what's kind of cool about Taylor Swift is that she's brought attention to how artists do make money and how
Hmm.
these, you know, the big man or the record label does make money. And so people maybe who wouldn't have otherwise been interested in understanding how that works now are because of Taylor Swift. And so I don't
Yeah.
think, I imagine that a lot of them, unless it pops up on their shuffle on Spotify or something, probably aren't really listening to the original recordings that much, unless it's an album that
Okay.
hasn't been re-recorded like Reputation. So I don't know
Okay.
if Jennessa, you have thoughts to add on that.
I think that's pretty much right. There are a few instances where it is unavoidable. For example, the music videos, because those are bound in their YouTube forms to the
Hmm.
non-Taylor's version, the original recordings of the tracks. Anyone who wants to watch the music videos will, uh, by necessity, be watching them with
Mhm.
the Big Machine records and Scooter Braun owned versions. And thus far, Taylor has not indicated anything about redoing music videos or trying to replace them with the tracks. And I imagine that's a losing game. I don't think it's worth it to her, like the albums themselves are.
Mhm.
There are differences between the re-recordings and the original versions just because Taylor's voice has matured so much, and her singing on a technical and proficiency level has gotten different. So particularly for her early albums, where part of the appeal was this very authentic, very young and still developing teen girl's voice, authentically belting out these lyrics about crying over boys on the guitar and whatnot. I think that there is a little bit more uh, there are a few more instances where people are going back and listening to those ones just because fans can recognize a difference between the two. And sometimes they just prefer the original version. However, I think in most cases, like what you were saying, Candace, people are listening to the Taylor's versions. Taylor has worked hard to get radio stations and to get Spotify and places like that to replace any um, song catalogs with her version of the songs, to replace any playlists that have her songs in them, to replace them with the Taylor's version. And it's broadly seen among Swifties to be equivalent to uh, breaking a strike line and being a scab, to go and
Okay.
invest money and time and things like that into the older works. So I think, Candace, you're pretty much right on the money.
Okay. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is just highlights of her career combined with ties to Disney. We talked earlier about she's never been a Disney employee. She's never been, and she's never had a Disney Channel show or anything like that, but she's very closely tied to uh, most things Disney. What are some of the, can both of you give 2 or 3 highlights of her career and how her career has sort of been intertwined or related to Disney in different ways? And Candace, you look like you're ready to talk, so go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't say this is necessarily a highlight, but something I'm kind of itching to say is that Taylor Swift is kind of an honorary Disney star in a way. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we kind of alluded to it earlier. She's not officially associated with Disney quite in the way that Olivia Rodrigo, Miley Cyrus, Hilary Duff were. They were put through the Disney star machine and then they popped out the other end very successful. But growing up in the Disney Channel golden era, if you will, when we were seeing Miley Cyrus and Raven Simone and all those artists kind of coming to be, we also saw Taylor Swift hang out with those same people at the same time. And she was kind of affiliated, even though she wasn't really on Disney Channel. And I remember like back in the 2000s when she first, when they did the Hannah Montana movie and her song
Mm-hmm.
Crazier was featured on it. That was, I believe, one of the first things she actually did with Disney. And then, we kind of saw her become friends with Selena Gomez and they're still really good friends. And so I think that kind of relationship, was good for her career because of course we're seeing her affiliated with other artists around her age. It's kind of giving her good exposure. Hopefully she had great friendships. It looks like she did with Selena Gomez as far as we can see, but it was good for Disney as well because they kind of brought in, the Taylor Swift fans to Disney. I think something I was thinking of mentioning as well and didn't mention already, she did make an appearance on the Jonas Brothers 3D concert
Mm-hmm.
back then as well. So it kind of further cemented that image of like, well, she's kind of part of Disney, but not. And so that kind of, I was reading an article the other day that was talking about how that might have been a strategic, or presumably everything for her is strategic, because it allowed her to maintain kind of a distinct identity from Disney so that she could transition more smoothly out of being a child star or a teen star into what she is today. But then I would also add, since we're talking about highlights of her career, her kind of encounter with Kanye West. I think that was her growing up moment. You know, when she started doing Reputation, we'd never seen anything like that from her before. She was always wearing the, you know, the pretty dresses, sparkly guitar, you know, very much meeting our standard expectations of femininity and what it should look like. And then she kind of turned it on its head and said, well, you know, I can be different. I can be something else too. You know, I'm not necessarily going to adhere to that. And I think that was the beginning of her going back to the shaking things up and not always meeting our expectations and showing that she can defy genres. So I guess the two that I would bring attention to, she's kind of that honorary Disney star and still kind of is bringing the Eras Tour to Disney. And she's shown that, you know, she's not going to be who she was. She's not afraid of her past, but she can also do things that are different and the unexpected and still own it in a really strong way.
Okay. Jennessa, go ahead.
That was so well put. And you touched on so many of the things that I was hoping you would. The song she did for Hannah Montana the movie as this, in my mind, very early point of her intermingling with the Disney Company. You mentioned her time with the Jonas Brothers, and of course, quite infamously now, she dated Joe Jonas, who broke up with her over text message. And that was the incorrect thing to do if you were dating Taylor Swift. But I love this idea of her being an honorary Disney Channel starlet, because I think that's in many ways what she was, and in many ways still is. She followed that same track. You can actually see similar phases, certainly in her Big Machine era, to what people like Miley Cyrus went through. Reputation, as you were mentioning, is this distinct departure from the Taylor that we knew, but it's not so much of a break as it could have been. In many ways, it feels very much like the Miley Cyrus can't be tamed move when she was at Disney. Similar levels of, we're going to go further, we're going to change the style, we're going to change the attitude. But it wasn't that album where she started upping the cursing and upping her agency as a sexual entity, as instead of just this pure chaste icon of girlhood. It's also worth noting, I think, that similar to how Ariana Grande is essentially a Disney Channel star that just happened to be on Nickelodeon, Taylor Swift is a Disney Channel star that just happened to be on Big Machine Records. She was doing these cross-promotional movie tie-ins, things like the Lorax, at the similar times to when Miley Cyrus was in Bolt with Disney, and the trajectory was the same. It's just they happened to be on different labels. And I think that if Disney could go back, they would absolutely make her an official Disney person. I think they would have given her a Disney Channel show if they could have. To my mind, it was not Disney's choice to stay independent. It was Taylor's choice and Big Machine Records' choice to keep her separated from that. Which is good for her in the long term, as we can clearly see.
Well, and that, you know, that gets to just kind of jumping around. that gets to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the Eras tour. Obviously, the Eras tour, the tour itself, the biggest tour of the summer, biggest tour. I don't have the numbers as far as what was grossed off of the tour, but I mean, it broke. It's famous for breaking Ticketmaster, um, and but she goes on tour, and then a little bit later, it's announced that wait, there's a movie. One of the tour stops, she actually she had a pro shoot of it, um, and you're going to be able to see this in the theaters. And for the people that could not afford to pay the tickets to go see her in person, now you can go. And what were they? $20 about
It's,
20,
it's
$25
about
in theaters.
it's about double normal ticket prices.
Okay.
1989, as it
Yep.
should
Okay.
be.
Um, so then, you had people going to theaters and watching it. And I live in an area where we don't have AMC. We have our theater chains are called Malco. They're it's kind of like an independent chain, but it's all over this region. So it's really interesting. We don't really have um, Regal, AMC, Tinseltown, anything like that. Um, and so it took a little bit longer for it to get to our theater chains. But people could see it in the theaters. And then, she releases it on digital. And then more recently, I think it was a month ago, well, it was the investor call that Disney had setting up for the proxy fight that is going on right now. And their most recent investor call, when they really, really needed good news, Bob Iger is able to announce that the movie is going to be on Disney Plus, and that is going to be the streaming provider or the streaming home for the movie, with 5 additional songs that hadn't been seen in the movie theater. Um, so that's kind of a timeline of things. What's so interesting to me is this movie, she distributed on her own. Her and her team distributed this through AMC. They didn't go through traditional studios, because the terms that traditional studios were going to provide were not what she wanted. So that's something that's really interesting. But it also brings up, well, first, let me stop there. What are your thoughts on that? That she distributes this on her own rather than going through a traditional studio. I mean, it kind of makes sense to what she's doing with her music now anyway. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that first.
Yeah, as you were talking, I just couldn't help but think of her in the offices of various studios, pitching the film and them not giving her the terms she wanted, and her just going all Ariel and going, "I want more," in that classic Disney style. But I think it was a really smart move because of 2 reasons. One, obviously, it made her more money. So smart in the immediate economic sense. However, I also think it makes her more valuable and gives her greater bargaining power with studios. Because based on this in the Searchlight film, I think Disney is going to be working really hard to lock her down with them. However, they won't be able to lock her down as firmly as they have been able to with other on-screen or off-screen talent, because she'll be coming into this with such an overwhelming level of power. She has bargaining abilities that nobody else has. So if Disney wants to give her the standard deal, she can just say, "No, I'll do it myself," walk away, go back to AMC, who will be happy, I'm sure, to do the same deal or better that they did for the Eras Tour. So it forces someone like Disney to provide more money as well as more creative freedom, while still getting Taylor to what she wants, which is, I think she wants a home studio to work with and to be involved with. She just doesn't want a repeat of Big Machine Records.
Yeah. Okay. Candace, go ahead.
Yeah, I think kind of building on that, I think as we kind of touched on, she has a clear history with Disney and Disney fans. And we touched on earlier that she really cares about her fans. And I think and imagine she knows that a lot of people who love Disney are her fans. And I'm sure that was a part of her decision when she was, you know, selling this to Disney, is that she could put her music or her tour on a platform where they were already, for people who are already interested in her work. And of course, anyone who is watching Disney Plus, if they don't like Taylor Swift already, they're probably a good candidate for it. And she's already had the experience of releasing the folklore sessions, the Long Pond sessions on Disney Plus, and she has experience with Netflix, you know, releasing Miss Americana. And I know she had the Reputation tour on there, which recently got pulled. I'm not sure if it's back on there yet or will ever go back on, but she's already had the opportunity to kind of experiment with some of the biggest platforms out there and kind of see how her work performs and what people think. And I imagine that part of her decision was just, this is the best place to house my work for my fans. Because yeah, Disney fans are going to be Taylor Swift fans for the most part. I know one of my favorite things to watch on Disney Plus are the Long Pond sessions. And I mean, that was a huge thing for me, like during the pandemic. And I think that going forward, the Eras Tour is going to be a similar comfort film for folks, just as we continue in our world. So I would say that was probably the biggest factor in her decision, or one of.
Okay.
And to go off of that a little bit further, because of this track record she has of being Disney adjacent for basically all of her career, and because so much of her music is based around the same principles and same ideas that Disney focuses on, Taylor loves writing songs about princesses and about romance and about she literally has a song called Love Story. And that only went further with her recent work like Folklore. So everything about her identity, her brand, her music perfectly synchronizes with Disney, both as it has been over the past couple decades and also how it is now, where it's expanding to be a little bit more explicit, a little bit more not just young ages and families, but all ages, and even sort of teen and leaning into mature audiences with Star Wars and the Marvel properties. There is no brand better suited to her release platform and to her fandom, as Candace mentioned, but also to maintaining the idea of Taylor Swift as she wants to be perceived.
And go ahead, Candace.
I'm just going to bounce off that a little bit more and also add, you know, we know Taylor Swift is a mastermind, or a self-proclaimed mastermind, and adding to catering to her fans and even her own brand, I would also say she might be doing it as a move, and not for certain, but just speculation, for leading the way for other artists. We know that she's done a lot for trying to create, you know, make Spotify a better platform for artists, but bringing it back to those folklore sessions, she kind of set the stage for Miley Cyrus and Billie Eilish to kind of create other similar, you know, concert films, if you will, on Disney Plus. And she's kind of bringing to life the music side of Disney Plus. And of course, we have Disney films that feature music, but this is kind of bringing more of the music industry to Disney Plus. Disney is not what it used to be in terms of producing artists, and, you know, giving opportunities for artists, quite to the level was, you know, say 20 years ago. So I would have to wonder if she's also trying to open the doorway for other folks to follow in suit.
Okay. And you know, when you talk about like being Disney adjacent, I mean, there are so many ties that someone like me sees, and as I said at the beginning, um, I don't know near as much about Taylor Swift as I would like to. Um, some of the things that stand out to me are, you know, just kind of some of the similarities. I mean, what she does with the friendship bracelets, you know, that's kind of like pin trading at Disney parks when people go to Disney parks and they want to trade pins. And the use of Easter eggs, I that is probably my favorite thing to pull out, or favorite thing I've noticed from what she does, and listening to the times that she's talked about that, and her use of Easter eggs to you know, give hints for upcoming projects. And so there are, like I said, for someone like me, there are things that stand out that kind of are Disney adjacent. Now, I have a theory, a working theory, and you two can completely demolish it at this moment if you want, because you know more than I do. My theory is when she released the movie in theaters using not using a traditional studio, I remember thinking, why would you, if you're a studio, why would you allow that to happen? Why would you not give a brand like Taylor Swift everything they ask for? Whatever her team asks for, you try to give that to them. And I also remember thinking, I really hope this ends up on Disney Plus, because I do think it's the fit, like you two talked about. I also think that if there is something that is going to significantly positively impact Disney Plus, it's going to have more Taylor Swift content on there. Much like she did with the NFL, where she, because of her relationship with Travis Kelce, um, she significantly increased the viewership of one of the most popular leagues in the world, which is extremely difficult to do. But she was able to do that. I think she would have the same type of impact on Disney Plus. And so I'm really, really interested to see. I mean, we have the figures and talked about it before we started recording, 4.6 million total views of the Eras Tour movie in the first 3 days, which broke records on Disney Plus. Um, it will be interesting when Nielsen comes out with their numbers. I would suspect that that movie will be in the top 10 for streaming movies. And, you know, one being that it's her, also, it's a 3.5 hour movie. So Nielsen tracks things by minutes watched. That's going to be a whole lot of minutes watched, right? Um, and so, but here's my theory. The Disney reportedly paid about between 70 and 75 million dollars for the Eras Tour movie to be on Disney Plus. I think that that could have been part of the negotiations when she was releasing the movie in theaters. And the final, and they could have made an offer to release it in theaters, to distribute it. She didn't like that offer. So then I could see the negotiations leading to the point of a studio like Disney saying, if you want to release it on your own, release it on your own. You make all the money off of that. We want it for our streaming service. So is there a way that we could negotiate that, you know, you do the movie theaters on your own, you then give us first right of refusal, or, you know, maybe before it went to theaters, she had already signed with Disney Plus, to have the concert on there. Um, that's my theory, is that because she is so closely tied with Disney, that there's the possibility that her team and the company work together to kind of allow her to have the best of two worlds. You know, she could release it in the theaters, and then they could benefit from having it on the streaming service, because like I said, if anything is going to significantly impact the streaming service, it would be more content of hers. Does that sound completely off the wall, or could there be something there?
First off, I just have to uh bring in the little best of both worlds catch there, because Hannah Montana just has so much in common with early Taylor, just in general. Um, so I appreciated you kind of sliding that in there. Um, I don't think it is unfounded. I think that she very clearly had plans for a bigger release on digital. I mean, there were certain songs that were removed from the theatrical version, Cardigan, most notably, uh, both to get it down to a 3-hour time, as well as to have this reason for people to go and watch it again. So I don't think it's impossible. Based on how the trades reacted when the news broke, they all seemed very surprised.
Mhm.
And trades like Variety and Deadline usually have people that have at least some insight into what's going on with studio negotiations. They won't release that until such a time when that information, either the studio allows them to, or it's been broken by a leaker or someone else and they can follow up with it. However, I think the fact that all the trades were shocked by it implies that either the meetings were the most ridiculously secret meetings in the world, or Disney is now coming back with their tail between their legs, their mouse tail between their legs, and just are trying to get Taylor back.
Mhm.
So we won't know for sure unless someone fully tells us. But my guess is that if Disney had given Taylor the deal that she wanted, she would have gone with them as a distributor. They didn't give it to her. She assumed she was just going to go fully independent with it. And then once Disney realized they made a big mistake, they came back and fought for it. Um, and the Eras Tour, we know had a bidding war for its streaming release, which
Mhm.
Disney won. So that's my other indication that it was not fully premeditated, even if, as Candace noted, the self-proclaimed mastermind that is Taylor Swift, even if she had ideas that this might lead her back to Disney.
Mhm. What were some of the other companies that, I mean, what were the other streamers that were heavily in the bidding war? Are we talking about the main streamers, Netflix, Disney? What other ones would have been included that you heard?
Uh, the major ones.
Okay.
I don't think Peacock was putting in a serious bid. Apple TV Plus is just they're just fine with Apple money. They're
Yeah.
good. Um, so I don't remember exactly who it was or if there was an official list given, but I do remember um reading through the trades that there was a bidding war.
Okay. Candace, do you have thoughts on that?
I think the only thing I was just going to add is kind of what we alluded to already, is that Taylor's going to want what she wants when she's making a deal. And I think of all the companies out there right now who could offer her what she wants, it's going to be Disney. Disney has been the king of, or queen, whatever term we want to use there, of, you know, the music industry, the entertainment industry, and really even industries outside of that for so long. They are one of the highest grossing organizations out there. So they are they're going to be willing to negotiate. And right now it is really, we're kind of in a difficult period with streaming platforms because there's so many that are popping up. There is fierce competition, and Disney, you know, when they set their eyes on a prize, they know they're very strategic about how they can get their viewership up so they can stay as a platform. And I think there's no question that Disney is going to. But, you know, as we've seen, even with Disney merging with Hulu, they're like, their eyes are on the prize and staying as a streaming platform, while some are most likely going to disappear over the next few years just because of competition. So, you know, they're going to be willing to offer Taylor, being who she is, what she wants for themselves, but also because they've seen that history with her and they know that they can they already have that fan base, and so they can speak to her needs in their own.
Yeah.
And Disney is also in a uniquely vulnerable position right now in terms of finances due to the proxy war, due to slumping sales for their feature releases. Marvel is slipping up. Star Wars has been slipping up. COVID, of course, had a massive hit on the parks. So there's a lot that is in flux at Disney that they're really trying to fix. That's why there's going to be like 5 or 6 sequels as their next big animated films from both Disney and Pixar. So they're in a uniquely vulnerable position, and Taylor is in a uniquely powerful position. So things are very in Taylor's favor to get whatever she wants, really. And Bob Iger has gone on record saying that they over expended for the streaming service, and most streaming services have said as much, that it was not as lucrative as they initially thought, which is why we've seen a bigger push toward digital on demand releases before things go to streaming, as opposed to the day and date ways of the past. And I think as Disney tries to fight churn, and as Disney tries to find products that will hit a lot of people, that will get a lot of people in and will make them not want to leave, Taylor is the Eras Tour is in a unique situation where there are a lot of people who either have Disney Plus already or will get Disney Plus and won't get rid of it because they can just pop on the Eras Tour whenever they want.
And I'm really excited to see the new subscribers. I want to see, you know, see the proof that having this on there has led to more subscriber growth. I'm really interested to see that. When the two of you were talking, and this notion that that Disney is vulnerable right now, which they definitely are. She is in a position of power. It actually reminded me of Pixar. And you know, when Bob Iger first took over the company, or first became CEO, and having to mend that relationship with Steve Jobs that had become so frayed under the last years of the Eisner era, and having to finding that brand, those products that have such a significant impact in our culture. And she could be it right now. She could be that that brand right now. And so that leads us into our rapid questions. But first, I wanted to make sure, was there anything else that we didn't mention that either of you think are worth talking about or worth mentioning? Go ahead, Candace.
I know we don't have too much time left, but I would add that, Taylor Swift, you mentioned the friendship bracelets, and her fans have it's kind of like a religious experience being a Swiftie. And that's something I'm interested in studying. It's not just being a fan of a singer, it's a whole culture that people
Mm-hmm.
are a part of and bought into. And so, and it speaks to a lot of different generations and a lot of different walks of life. When people watch the Eras Tour, it's not just, teenage girls, which is maybe what you'd think, but it's, their moms and the dads want to watch it and brother wants to watch it too. Everybody wants to watch it and be a part of that experience. And then they want to even be a part of it, in the concert, like at the actual physical concerts. They want to be a part of it on social media. So there's a lot more to Taylor Swift than even kind of just beyond herself and what she puts out there. So I think that was the only thing I think that I wish we would have touched on a little bit more, is this Taylor has really established something that's a lot larger than just her.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that speaks to one of the things we talked about before the recording. That was a really wonderful question that you asked, which was Taylor Swift as unique, both for genre reasons and for like fiscal overarching success reasons. So maybe that would be something to bring
Yeah.
into this conversation.
That was actually my next question. That was the first rapid question. So we did, before we recorded, we started talking about what is a contemporary, or what's a comparison. I can't think of a comparison now. The Throughout history and entertainment, um, what what band, what talent, what brand would you compare Taylor Swift to, and why?
I would compare Taylor Swift to Beatlemania or the Beatles, because
Okay.
back in the day, they created a craze unlike any other. And I think, they've released many, many number one singles, and I think Taylor Swift, she's outdone pretty much everybody at this point, but they're probably the only ones that kind of come close. And kind of on the religious note, I think it was John Lennon said, that they were as famous as Jesus at the time, which I know is a controversial statement, but Taylor Swift is kind of, everyone knows who Taylor Swift is. Anybody, even if they don't like music that much, they know who she is. And everyone knew who the Beatles were. So that's who I would compare her to.
Okay. All right.
In terms of music, I agree wholeheartedly with the Beatles. I would add Elvis as the only other even approximate comparison point. Elvis had that singular figure of himself as the iconic one, whereas the Beatles, of course, were split amidst a group of three people plus Ringo.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's hard to determine whether her similarities are closer to Elvis or closer to the Beatles. Elvis also had, of course, deep roots with country music
Mm-hmm.
and Nashville and Tennessee and places like that, which Taylor does too. However, for me, the best comparison point for her isn't a recording artist. It is a poet. And my research on Taylor Swift is largely based in English and lyric studies, and the idea that what Taylor Swift most resembles as a phenomenon and as a maker of art is an artist like Emily Dickinson.
Okay.
These poetesses from the 1800s that were major figures within publishing, within magazines, periodicals, that were constructed both through their own work, but also through gossip and through their relationship status, and were often constructed by people who weren't themselves, which is very much what Taylor experienced in her earliest years. And the big change from someone like Emily Dickinson is that she's now gained control over her own work, and that she, instead of just writing poetry, which she does, and she has included poems with some of her album releases, and of course we are all anxiously awaiting for the Tortured Poets Department, her next album, but that she's also performing and singing them. So I think she's the first person we've seen and recorded music that really resembles Emily Dickinson.
Okay. All right. So the rest of the rapid questions, I usually ask about parks. And so I'll just rattle off 2 or 3 of those. And just real quick, so we can get to the other ones. Just give me your favorite, no explanation needed. For both, we'll start with Candace. We'll go Candace, then Jennessa, so we can move through these. Favorite Disney park?
Oh, Disneyland.
Okay.
Disney World, specifically
Okay.
Magic Kingdom.
Okay. Favorite Disney attraction?
Pirates of the Caribbean, hands down.
Jungle Cruise all day, every day.
All right. And then one that favorite Disney snack. This is always my favorite.
That's hard. Probably churros.
Okay.
I mean, the Dole Whip.
I did not discover the Dole Whip until we went back in 2021. Every time I've gone now, I've probably had 4 or 5 of those on my trip. So I've more than made up for not discovering those until later in life. All right, so
if you're sleeping on the Dole Whip, you need to get the Dole Whip.
I'm still waiting for it to be available in stores. I can't find it in stores here. My sister and mother have told me they now have them in Costco's where they live. So I'm hoping it's not long until they're in our area as well. All right, so specific to Taylor Swift, we had about 10 minutes or so. You can explain if you want. You don't have to explain any of your answers if you don't want to. The first one is, what Disney character would Taylor Swift be? Go ahead, Candace.
Gee, this is a tough one. I think that she's been different Disney characters throughout her different eras. So I think the first one that comes to mind, but I'm going to pin it to a specific era because there's so many versions of Taylor. I'd say the love story version of Taylor Swift, or, the fearless version, would be Cinderella. She's kind of our Barbie princess at that point. But I know she's also been super fierce like Mulan and Pocahontas, so maybe a little bit of them. But I would say for that specific era, I'll say Cinderella.
Okay. All right.
So Taylor's had a few specific iterations of her that have explicitly referenced Disney. During the Fearless and Speak Now era, she had a portrait done where she was portrayed as Rapunzel. And I think that's a really good comparison point for those first 3 albums. This character who's both trapped in some way, trapped by childhood, trapped by girlhood angst, but who overcomes that through being fearless, through speaking now and whatnot.
Okay.
In terms of her upcoming album, she has a song on there that's a literal reference to The Little Mermaid. One of my favorite quotes in that movie, and possibly in Disney, period, Ariel yelling, "But Daddy, I love him." She has a song called Daddy, I Love Him on the upcoming album. So I'm going to guess she's in her Ariel era there.
Okay.
Overall, though, I think that much like Candace said, she bats between multiple Disney princesses. I think the only one that she hasn't really, that I don't see a huge affinity with her for yet, is Tiana. Because Tiana, Taylor Swift certainly works hard like Tiana, but I think there's a personality of sass and a love for cooking and things like that Tiana has that I haven't seen in Taylor yet. But that's probably
Okay.
just because she hasn't written her cooking album yet.
All right, Jennessa, you take this one first. If there was an attraction built or rethemed around Taylor Swift at any of the parks, what do you think a new or rethemed attraction for Taylor Swift would be?
Oh, that's such a great question. Um, I mean, it would be very funny if the rock and roller coaster was like rethemed to the slowest Taylor Swift songs. Like it's just it becomes a 10-minute ride. It's just All Too Well, the 10-minute version. So you're just hurtling through this roller coaster while the saddest song in the universe plays. Um, I think a more practical one that she could take over would be um the building where, if it's still up, the American Idol experience
Okay. Yeah.
was. I think that there could be an appeal to having a Taylor Swift experience where, instead of competing in a contest and being ridiculed by a Simon Cowell like figure, um, it's either a stage show or an interactive show where
Okay.
that Taylor's been involved with. Um, those I think would be the that type of thing I think would be the easiest
Okay.
fit. Though a dark ride or something like that could also certainly work.
Okay. I think going off of that, like the interactive, it would either take a lot of AI to do this, or take someone who was really, really good at sounding like Taylor Swift, but even something that's like the live character initiative, where you have like Crush at Epcot, where somebody could actually feel as though they're talking to her during a concert, or maybe it is a slower, or I'm sorry, a smaller setting where she's playing songs, but then like she'll answer questions and things like that. I think maybe that could happen too. Candace, go ahead.
I love that. And could I add one thing before Candace goes?
Yeah.
Because you gave me another idea with the animatronic suggestion. Just replace all the presidents in the Hall of Presidents with versions of Taylor. Um, People might actually go into that building if that were the case.
Have an animatronic for every era.
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially just see if you can retrofit all the previous animatronics to be Taylor, like they supposedly did with the Donald Trump one, a refitting of their Hillary
Yeah.
Clinton model. So
Yeah.
You guys have come up with a lot of really good ideas, so it's really hard to add anything. I was immediately thinking of the presidents in turning it into Taylor as you guys
Oh,
were
okay.
talking about that. So I was thinking about that. I guess at California Adventure, we have, soaring around the world or soaring over California previously. You could do soaring through the eras and have kind of a eras tour experience, if you will, on the ride. I'm not sure what that would look like, how if we'd be flying over the concert or different places that she's toured. That could be kind of interesting. But that was the main idea. And then I was going to kind of propose the same thing you guys already touched on. Instead of meeting Abraham Lincoln, we could meet Taylor Swift, which I think I agree. That would probably bring more people in to those buildings, on a hot summer day instead of, I don't know how many people really want to meet Abraham Lincoln in 2024, but.
All right, the next one, and Candace, you go ahead with this one first. Are either of you or both of you, do you consider yourselves Marvel fans? Okay, so I'm going to ask you about a rumor. Um, do you think Taylor Swift will show up in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie? As there's been a rumor she could show up as Dazzler, which is a Marvel character. Do you think do you think that will happen? I mean, she has a connection. She has a very strong connection with Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. Do you think she could show up in that movie?
I think there's a strong likelihood, but I see Jennessa getting really excited, so I feel like she knows more about this than I do. So I'll let Jennessa take this one.
Okay.
I have not heard this rumor, but I hope desperately with all my heart that it's true. The Dazzler is my favorite Marvel character, and Taylor is just the spitting image of Dazzler, both in
Well,
appearance as well as in kind of personality. So I desperately hope it's true now.
and when I was looking that up, um, the costume that they show for the comic character, she wore a costume that looked very similar to that in the Eras Tour movie. Um, so that's could be something that's really interesting. Also, I mean, if you talk about Disney being in a situation where they need more people to go see their movies in the theaters, um, maybe Taylor Swift would become the new Grogu for Star Wars, and how they've just put Grogu in everything because people love him. Maybe maybe that's what Disney should do, at least for the
I, I
time being.
I love that. And I'm thinking of the fact that I know people who went to see the Eternals just because Harry Styles
Yeah,
was in the end credit scene. So
yeah. The so the next question, or the last question, um, Jennessa, go ahead. You do this one first. Will Taylor Swift ever voice a Disney princess?
that's a very good question. I Disney has incorporated more pop voices into their princesses. In particular, Rapunzel being voiced by Mandy Moore. I think that and Idina Menzel, of course, as Elsa, and Kristen Bell as Anna. I think there's a chance of it. My worry as Disney would be that she overwhelms the character. So my thinking is that Taylor Swift, I want her to be a Disney princess desperately. Now you've given me two things to hope for, and that I will inevitably be disappointed by in the future.
I
Um,
apologize.
um, but I think it's more likely that she gets another major character role that's
Okay.
not a Disney princess, but is a, a major uh female character in one of their animated films.
Okay. Candace?
I was kind of thinking a similar answer there. I know she likes cats, and I don't know if and I know she did the Cats movie. I don't know if she'd be a Disney princess, but I could definitely seeing her voice some other sort of character. And if Disney wanted to incentivize her, they probably would do something cat related. If they ever redid something with the Aristocats or something similar, I could see her getting involved because I know she likes to do things that she loves and is passionate about, and she loves cats. So I could definitely see her doing something like that, but definitely some sort of strong female character. I could definitely see her, or maybe some sort of standalone film that's not quite, she's not quite a Disney princess, but it is a strong female lead, I
Mhm.
think would work. And hopefully they could take advantage of her voice if they do that, kind of like with Frozen.
Yeah.
It's a possibility.
Yeah, and I
Well, and
mean, what happens when Zootopia runs its course, and they need the next anthropomorphic Disney film?
mhm.
Have it star a cat who wants to be a music star, and we follow her journey, and it's just Taylor Swift.
Yeah. The one thing I was thinking when I wrote that question is, if she were a Disney princess, she would be similar to what Frozen was, where, Frozen, Anna and Elsa are not considered princess. They are not part of the princess brand because it's this, to me, it's this fascinating story of how, the economics of those two characters selling so much on their own, to not include them in the Disney princess brand, influenced the storytelling of how, well, Elsa is technically a queen, and now Anna is a queen. So neither one of them are actually princesses. And that was kind of I thought the same thing about Taylor Swift. If there's a character that is associated with Taylor Swift, voiced by Taylor Swift, um, it, she would be on her own as far as the branding prowess that she would have. So
You're on
that's
your own,
all that
kid.
I
You always have been.
have. That's all that I have. Thank you so much to both of you for coming and talking to us today, walking me through some of this. As I said, now I don't know as much as I want. Now I want to learn much more, which is what I always look for in these visits. So I appreciate both of you coming and doing that. Before we leave, is there a way, if anybody wants to contact you, talk more about this, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Jennessa, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a website, jennessahester.com, which has my professional email on it. But honestly, the easiest way to get a hold of me is uh find me on Twitter, and
Okay.
we can just do a quick DMs back and forth. Um and I'm at Cherry Pop Punk on
Okay.
there and on other social media. So
All right. Thank you. Candace?
You can connect with me on pretty much all social media platforms, but my handle is Candace Grewe instead of Candace Saunders-Grewe. Probably the best place to find me is TikTok. I'm all over TikTok, so you can find me there.
Okay. All right. And thank you, both of you, again. This was very fun. I learned a lot and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.